Chapter 16. A Medical Breakthrough. By Professor Clancy D. Mackenzie. In September 1969, I took my first Silva Mind Control class spurred on by the guarantee of clairvoyance, or a full money-back guarantee. The experience was exhilarating. No one asked for a refund, and skeptics like myself seemed particularly impressed. The timing was just right. I had completed formal academic training, including adult and child psychiatry residency programs and adult and child psychoanalytic training courses. This left me free to study my patients and to apply methods of creative thinking as taught in the Silva course. Looking back, I recognize four ingredients that were vital components for my discovery of new concepts in the field. The first was the thorough background and formal training I received. The second was a separation from that body of knowledge for a period of time. You cannot see a cloud when you are in it. You must first separate to catch its outline and see beyond. The third was creative thinking, which Jose Silva taught me. The fourth ingredient was love. All of my efforts at deciphering cause, mechanisms, and treatment for serious disorders were propelled strictly out of a sincere desire to help my patients. It is this propelling force that provides the energy, the clarity, and the insights for healing. Jose Silva's course utilizes the same love energy for psychic diagnosis. Each trainee pictures the patient for the purpose of trying to help that individual, and according to Mr. Silva, it is largely because of this intended purpose that the trainee is able to do so much. As soon as the trainee begins thinking, "Look what I can do," it is gone. It then is necessary to change that thinking to, "Let me find out what is wrong with this person and what I can do to help." With that, the magic returns. The creative techniques are taught well enough in the basic Silva course, and so there is no need to repeat them here, nor would this chapter allow enough space. Instead, I will briefly summarize the findings for you. The mystery solved. Often what is most profound, once revealed, is profoundly simple. I hope this is your experience as you read these next few pages, within which I describe a new origin for schizophrenia, depression, and other serious disorders. Everyone understands post-traumatic stress disorder from combat. A car backfires next to a combat veteran, and he grabs a gun and hides in the woods for a few days. His reality and behavior change to that of wartime. Even his body chemistry and physiology match that of the earlier time when his life was in extreme danger. We understand, because the earlier events associated with loud noise were so life-threatening that they were indelibly etched upon his mind and brain. What we fail to recognize is that more terrifying than war trauma to a soldier is separation from the mother to an infant. To all mammalian infants, for the last 150 million years, separation from the mother has meant death. Thus, the human infant is highly susceptible to what it considers to be a threat of separation. This need not be an obvious threat of separation, such as one caused by the death of a parent or by parental divorce. Unsuspected events can overwhelm the infant and set the stage for the later development of a serious disorder. Such traumas might include the family moving to a new house and the mother busying herself making the new place look like home, or an older child becoming deathly ill and requiring all the mother's attention for a period of time. In previous generations, the birth of a younger sibling was devastating because mothers spent 5 days in the hospital following delivery. These separations might not seem traumatic from the adult perspective, but from an infant's point of view they can be overwhelming. Any event that results in the mother's temporary absence or distraction, potentially, can frighten the infant very much and leave the indelible mark etched upon his or her mind and brain. Then 10, 20, or 30 years later, instead of a loud noise precipitating the flashback, it is a separation from some other most important person, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, or group, which precipitates the initial step back in time. And instead of combat reality and behavior, it is infant reality and behavior that we see. A full-grown man, for example, might sit in the middle of the floor, screaming, "Mommy! Mommy!" The first time I witnessed this was nearly 60 years ago, when I was a young child. I saw an 18-year-old girl running nude through the lawn sprinkler in the front yard, squealing with delight. As a young child I thought, what's wrong with her? Grown-ups don't do that. It took a quarter of a century for me to realize that this was perfectly normal behavior, but transposed in time. Had she been 18 months old instead of 18 years old, no one would have thought anything odd about her behavior. With careful examination, virtually every piece of bizarre reality and behavior of the person with schizophrenia matches in some way that of the infant, and when you have studied this as carefully, and for as long as I have, you will realize that it matches the reality and behavior of the infant at the precise time or age that the original trauma occurred. Simple so far? Just like post-traumatic stress disorder from combat. A loud noise 20 years after the original trauma precipitates a flashback to war experience and behavior because loud noise was associated with terrifying experiences of war. A separation from a most important person 20 years after the original trauma precipitates a flashback to the infant experience and behavior because the infant feared separation and felt equally overwhelmed. The most important difference between the combat veteran and the person with schizophrenia is that while the veteran flashes back to the brain structures he was using as an adult, the person with schizophrenia flashes back to the brain structures he was using as an infant. These are the earlier developmental regions of the brain, the parts of the brain we were using before we became so smart. Depending on how early the original trauma occurred, these are the parts of the brain we were using before we learned to walk or talk. These earlier developmental structures are the ones that produce more of the neurotransmitters involved in the disease process, such as dopamine. In schizophrenia, when they are reactivated as a result of shifting to infancy, they produce more. Is this not obvious? Why has no one suspected this? Why has everyone looked only from the opposite direction and wondered how? Dopamine causes schizophrenia? Likewise, there is a shift of brain activity away from the later developmental structures. Remember the grown man sitting in the middle of the floor screaming for his mommy? Was he using the part of his brain that developed in adult life? Obviously not. And what happens to a part of the body that becomes less active? It atrophies. This is much like the common expression use it or lose it. So the brain atrophies as the result of the disease process. So why hasn't anyone even entertained the thought that schizophrenia causes brain atrophy? Why do researchers only look at brain changes and wonder how these cause schizophrenia? Why isn't disuse atrophy the first thing they question with any other part of the body that atrophies? One thinks of disuse atrophy first. I have long puzzled over the reason why such obvious questions were never considered. Researchers look at the multitude of biological changes that occur with schizophrenia and take them as evidence of biological cause, when common sense would dictate that it more likely represents evidence of biological results due to an underlying problem. It stands to reason that if biological change is the result of the disease process, then biological change should be present in great abundance. One reason for the myopia could be the large amount of funds devoted to the search for biological cause. The powers that be have $970 million allocated for the year 2000, largely to be used to find the biological cause of mental illness. Would they be interested in doing something other than what already is bringing in $970 million? Aside from the search for biological cause, there is yet another area of investigation that continues to take center stage over and over again: the search for genetic cause. According to Kaplan and Sadok, a leading psychiatric resource book, nearly half of the chromosomes have been implicated in a genetic cause for schizophrenia. Several times each year, for as many decades as I remember, we have seen newspaper headlines about scientists at Ivy League universities identifying the gene that causes schizophrenia. It's the same story each time, only that the university and the identity of the chromosome differ. If such a gene truly were identified, why would they come out with a different one several times each year? If 1% of those research dollars was spent identifying the peak age of origin and age range of origin for each psychiatric symptom or disorder, there no longer would be a question as to origin of mental and emotional problems. The truth of the matter is that if we combine genetic factors plus familial factors, traits that run in families as well as in the genes, only 10% of people with schizophrenia have a first-degree relative with the disorder. It is a fact that some, possibly even most, of this 10% have nothing to do with heredity, since familial factors invariably are included among genetic studies as though they were genetic. This does not mean that I disagree with genetic predisposition, but contrast the 10% with our finding of delayed post-traumatic stress disorder. Delayed post-traumatic stress disorder cannot occur without an original trauma. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. The unification theory of mental illness. What we have been describing thus far is a comprehensive formulation for the origin and mechanism of schizophrenia, which applies to all serious mental and emotional disorders that I have studied, and for which the noted late Dr. O. Spurgeon, English, coined the name, the unification theory of mental illness. The unification model neither refutes biological change nor precludes genetic predisposition. I have no quarrel with any biological finding. The researchers have done their jobs very well. And their findings are important, because just as a chain can be broken at any link, so can schizophrenia be interrupted at many levels. Biological findings also confirm psychological origin, since nearly every biological change studied is precisely what we would expect to find when persons shift brain activity away from adult brain structures and back to regions of the brain that were active and developing during infancy. Thus, biological change is important in confirming traumatic origin. Genetic factors are a part of the model as well, but they represent predisposition, and their degree of contribution is not yet determined to my satisfaction. This does not change traumatic origin. It is possible that infant trauma and genetic predisposition both could be necessary in some cases. If proven, I shall accept this most readily. The unification model encompasses all possibilities. It provides the framework in which all findings are accommodated and given due measure of importance. Summary. You now have an overview of the origin of schizophrenia. There may or may not be a significant genetic predisposition. Regardless of this factor, in order to develop the disorder later in life, there must be an infant separation trauma. I have not seen this to be otherwise, whenever the history is known. There are thousands of events that can cause the infant to feel threatened with separation and overwhelmed, and most of these are not obvious to the adult. This is no one's fault, and the events are unintentional. But then years later a spouse, partner, or group rejects or leaves the person. If this experience is sufficiently intense and similar to the first, then that individual flashes back to the time of the original trauma. He begins behaving the way he did as a young child, and he begins using the brain structures he was using then as well. These structures produce more of the neurotransmitters involved in the disease process, and when reactivated, that is what they do. Likewise, since there is a shift of brain activity away from the later developmental structures, there develops a disuse atrophies would occur in any other part of the body not used. Thus we have a neurological disorder. This is the essence of the unification theory of mental illness, and if you understand this much, then in my opinion you understand more than most physicians, more than most researchers, and more than the National Institute of Mental Health. You certainly do not know more about the disorder, but you have a better understanding of its origin and how it works. This is very important, because with this understanding you will be able to understand why it is unnecessary to have the disorder. Such insights, those that change an entire field of thought, come only through Enlightenment techniques. With the help of the creative insights that he gained at the alpha level, Dr. Mackenzie made a major medical breakthrough in understanding the cause of schizophrenia and depression. His findings as to origin have been tested and confirmed on 9,000 patients with schizophrenia, and his treatment methods based on that insight are so effective that many patients no longer need medication after the first few months.